Next, I think it'd be fun to have some changes in the fill color. What I'd like to do is be able to have like a pool of fill colors that I can draw upon, and then assign them out here to these various shapes. So I'm going to choose 5 fill colors as my pool of colors. Now, obviously, you can set this up however you want. You could have it pull from 10 colors or 2 colors. But I'm sticking with 5 because it's the same convention as these ASE, Adobe Swatch Exchange files from color.adobe.com. That way, I can download these ASC files and convert them into the RGB values, or I can just simply come in here and take a quick look at this. If I just come in here, I can see the RGB values and kind of convert them accordingly inside here. I find the 5 colors is actually pretty useful for creating a coherent color scheme, and that's kind of the way I like to have my ShapeMaker plugin. But of course, don't feel limited. You can do whatever you want for yours. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate fill color 5 times, and then I think there's a lot of interesting ways that the colors could actually be assigned to the shapes. The first 2 that I can think of would be just a simple, iterator. It just goes down through the colors one by one and assigns them. And I think it'd also be really nice if it could like randomly draw from a pool of colors and assign them to the shapes. So let's implement those 2 first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate I'm going to come in here into the JSON, and I'm just going to duplicate fill color 5 times. So I'm going to come to fill color, I'm going to copy it, and I'll paste, 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 and paste. And that is, and if I save, these are all called fill color, so I need to give them different names. And let's come in here to this last one. That's going to be 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I'm saving, and there's no errors. And I'm working on a copy. There we go. Sorry, I had to update the right file there. I've got 2 copies here. I've got my previous copy. So let's see. There's an error at 213 for fill color. I changed the name from fill color to fill color 1. So let's go ahead and let's update that. Fill is equal to fill color 1. So what I want to do is actually expand this little section inside here, fill color. So instead of this being fill color equals fill color 1, I want that to be some stuff. So probably a conditional, and then basically this is kind of what we want our operation to be, something different. So I think right away I'm going to come in here and definitely change these values just for testing, from pink values to different values. Okay, now this is something kind of cool. I can come in here and just select these values. And then once I'm done with my selections, I'm just adjusting these values here in the editor. I'm going to say save current as default. And that's going to push all the values back into the ISF file. So that's handy right there. Okay, so now I want to just step through these different values and just assign them one into each shape. And you're probably already guessing how we're going to do this, right? Every single time we go through the loop, we're going to get a new value for I. And so because this is an incrementing value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all we really need to do is have this one be 1, and this one be 2, and this one be 3, and this one be 4, and this one be 5. And then we want it to repeat back around again. So the way to do that is with a modulus. Modulus will let us kind of return values. And really what it's doing, the mathematics is it's dividing by a number and returning the remainder. So one way to think about it is actually, if we were just come back here to Desmos and we were to graph x, x is kind of moving always up and to the right because x is graphed against itself. If we come in here and we add a modulus, we can go ahead and choose the number that we'd like to modulus against. In this case, it's 3. So in this case, x is always being divided by 3. But rather than returning the result of that, it's returning the remainder. So this is a great way to create repeating kind of values. And we use it all the time for intervals, particularly like timing animations. If you want to animate a traffic light, something that went red, yellow, green, modulus is great for that. So that's basically what we're doing here. One thing that I think would be easier is actually I'm going to store all these colors inside an array. That way it'll be a lot easier to refer to the colors by a number rather than a bunch of conditionals with their name. So I'm going to do that in here. Above the main, I'm going to just go ahead and quickly create a colors array. And we've looked at arrays in the past, creating them in the JSON, but we can create them here also down in the shader code. And then I'm going to fill the array. So the first thing I'm going to do is say fill the array. And colors 0 is going to be equal to fill color 1. And I've changed my mind on these names of these things. I think the number of the color internally would make more sense if it was the color of the number in the array. So instead of fill color 1, I'm going to change this to 0. And I'm going to make this be fill color 1. That way, the numbers I'm using are kind of like 0-based indexed, but the numbers here in the interface are going to be correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is going to start 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That way everything's consistent. So I'm going to come down here and let's go ahead and come back into main and 0, and then I just need to duplicate this 5 times. Now you could probably do this with a for loop. One, 2, 3, 4. And this is going to be fill color 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. So those are all nice and the same. So now all I need to do if I want to use the colors, if I want to use a color from this pool, I can just refer to it here with this array down here in my code. And that'll make things a lot cleaner and actually a lot easier. All this stuff can be done in kind of like one line of code now. Okay, so to make it iterate, we just need that modulus thing. So down here inside fill, instead of this being fill color 1, let's just test these real quick. Rather than doing fill color 0 now, let's go ahead and test it with our variable. So colors 0. And I need to make sure that it's the RGB. There we go. So there's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. So we just need a way now to increment this number. I mean, we could just put I in here, right? But we're going to have a problem here. First of all, we're going to run out of numbers, like we're going to run out of places here inside the array. So we need to, that's where we need the modulus. We need to have that do this, right? So it goes back to the beginning again. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. So we could say then mod I by our sum total count, which is 5. Okay, now this is giving us an error. And this actually has to do with the fact that this is a float value up here, but colors needs an integer because it's a solid place. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a new variable, a new integer. I'm going to call it color index. I'm just going to split this and break it up there so it's a little easier to see. And for color index, I'm going to need I, and I'm going to need our sum total number, which is going to be 5. Let's see, 5.0, so that's a float, and I is a float. So let's get the modulus of both those things. And then let's test it down here. And I think I need to cast this as an int. Since this is an int here, this is actually returning a float of 5.0 and 1.0. So to cast it as an int, I'll just wrap it inside an int. And there we go. So let's go ahead and test this out with multiply, over, and add mode. Cool. And we can get all kinds of generative looks right away with this sort of thing, right? I haven't quite decided yet if the stroke color, if I want to iterate through stroke colors too. For my ShapeMaker plugin, actually, I didn't. I like to have the stroke kind of consistent, but again, that's entirely up to you. Okay, great. So next thing we need to do is let's create a conditional here so that the fill could either iterate through or it can be assigned randomly. So next we're going to do something really similar, but instead of just walking through the numbers, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it'd be really cool if we could just return a random number in here. And so that way it would just kind of draw from this pool of colors and assign them out here to the shapes. So what I'm going to do is definitely not a random number. I'm going to do something that's a kind of a pseudo-random number. And actually I'm going to do a real cheap random number. There's a lot of ways to do random numbers, you know, in computation. What I'm going to do is, I would say, kind of pseudo-random at best. What I'm going to do is actually just generate a sine wave, and I'm just going to multiply that sine wave. Like, let's say I'm in here, we've got x. Of course, we get the sine of x. This is going to return an oscillating number between -1 and 1. And actually, if I just multiply that sine wave by a pretty big number, even 100, if you sample just along I here, like 0, 1, 2, 3, you know, you're going to get a fairly random number between -1 and 1. And if I just keep multiplying this, you know, it doesn't take long before, boy, look at how dense that's getting there, before this is going to probably be random enough for my needs. In fact, I mean, I'm only going to need enough random numbers as I have count. So that's going to be a really cheap way to just make something that kind of is like pseudo-random. So what I want is to have vec3 fill be equal to colors index.rgb. So this is like one kind of group of code. And then I want to have vec3 fill be equal to colors and then something else there inside the index. So because of that, I'm actually going to go ahead and build a control for that. Let's get a condition going on there. So I've got circle type, I've got blend mode, and I'm going to go ahead and make another copy. And let's go ahead and call this one fill type. Great. So we've got fill type, add over multiply, blend mode, and shape type. And I'm going to change fill type to, well, let's go ahead and let's have, let's do 3 maybe values for now. And the first one, let's say solid. That'll be just the first color. And then we'll have iterate to walk through the colors, and then we'll have random. Great. And I'm going to, for now, just leave the default on random because that's the one that we're testing. And let's come down here into our code then, and let's build some conditions for that. And if fill type is equal to 0, then let's make fill be equal to just the first number. So that's if we just want all of these the same color. That one's nice and simple. And if fill type is equal to 1, then we want to have all this stuff happen. And that's our iterate mode. And then finally, if it's equal to 2, then we're going to have something else happen. For now, I'll just copy and paste this. I'm instantiating fill every single time here, so actually what I need to do is create a fill right here, and I'll just fill it with something empty, and then I'll just update fill based on these conditions rather than instantiating the variable 3 times, which will throw an error. I've called this color index. I'm going to call this maybe rand index to show that it's random. And this is still pointing to that, so let's copy and paste right there. Okay, so right now random and iterate should be returning the same code, and solid should just be returning the first color. Great. Okay, so what we want to do is change this now so that it's random. And since we're going to do this so frequently, it's so frequent that we have a random number, I'm actually going to just make a quick function for this. So above the shape functions, I'm going to build some utility functions. And as I mentioned, this is going to be a real cheap random number. So I want to return a float, rand num. And what it's going to do is it's going to return a sine wave. And that sine wave should be some number we're going to pass in. So we want to increment that sine wave with, let's call it x, same as we're doing down here. And then let's just go ahead and multiply it by some big number. And let's see, 10,000 ought to do it. And then what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to throw away all the negatives and the ones, everything except everything that's in front of the decimal. And you can do that with fract. And what fract does is it just takes any number and just returns everything that's after the decimal. And so the negatives and the positives won't count, and then the integers, actually, the whole values won't count either. We're just going to get decimal numbers here. And that's actually great. That's all we want. This is going to return a number between basically, 0 and just one below 1. And as I mentioned, there's I don't know if you'd use this in a scientific, use this scientifically, this random number generator. That's going to be fine for us. Okay, so we have a nice random number function now. Let's come down here to our code, and let's make use of it. So down in here, I'm going to be replacing random index. What I really want here is a random number. And I'm going to choose random num. And then in here, I want each one to be a new random number. So I'm going to go ahead and seed it with I. I is a float number that comes in. That means I'm going to get a random I value in here along the sine wave. And because that sine wave is going to be packed so tight, it's going to give me a bunch of random numbers. And that's great. And then this is going to give me, let's see, this is going to be returning a random number. What is this? This is returning a random number between 0 and 1. And of course, I want this to be a random number between 0 and 5. And then, just like I did up there, I had to cast it all as an int. So let's do that too. Okay. And let's go ahead and call rand index right there. And look at that. Very cool. So random numbers, iterate numbers, solid numbers. And I think it'd be a little easier to see if I put this in over mode and reduce the count down to see these solid. It iterates through the colors, and it randomly generates the colors. One last change I want to make to my random number is I'm going to put a seed value in here. So we can just go ahead and just add in another number here, random seed, say. Just a number that's just going to add to it. And that's going to just kind of like march along the sine wave and return different results as it moves through that sine wave. So that's just going to be a simple slider. Let's go ahead and put that right in here. Boy, it's getting crowded in here, isn't it? Let's put it above count, I guess. Or let's put it under fill type since it's a property of random. So underneath fill type, I've got size, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy it. And above size, I'm going to get paste and seed random, and just a random default of 0.5 is probably fine. Actually, 0 is probably fine here. let's make sure these are floats. And it's asking for random seed, and I called it seed random. There we go. We are creative coding here. Cool, look at that. So as I move through that, that's actually, it's going to just probably give me all the randoms I need. I don't know if I want this to be any more complicated than this. That way I can kind of audition different random, kind of like random results for each of those guys. Like, notice I stopped on one, it actually gave me a lot more purples. That was kind of cool. So I can just kind of find the one that I like. I'm going to over mode. Let's make these guys be white. And we'll increase the size. And as I change the random seed, look at that. We get all those different random values in there. That's pretty cool. Okay, so let's see. There's other fun things I can do here with the colors. And I think what I'd also like to do is build in a fill type that, well, first of all, I think a fill type of none might be useful. And that should be pretty easy, just to make sure that the fill is an alpha. And then I think I also want to do a fill type that actually blends these colors together. And in my ShapeMaker plugin, I have them blend 2, 3, 4, and 5 values. So let's do that next.